Hello and welcome to Butterflies Australia. This video is a guide on how to use the Butterflies Australia phone app. So we'll start off by looking at the home screen. The format of this video is essentially we're going to look at each of the individual controls that the app has, just as a sort of a comprehensive view of everything that you can do with the app. So this isn't necessarily going to look at the flow of each action you can take, but rather all of the different variations that you can achieve using the buttons on the different interfaces. So on the home screen, the first button to note is this account settings button. It's the cog in the top right corner. And that takes you to all of the important account-based settings in the app, and we'll look at that screen after the home screen. Secondly, just note that below the icon, there's a set of numbers. This is your current position using the GPS built into your phone. And it's important to note that those numbers are there. If they're missing and you have the latest version of the app, then it may be that your GPS is currently not working. And so the app won't be able to record your data properly. And it also shows your altitude and accuracy, which again is gained from the onboard GPS chip. There are two types of buttons that let you record a sighting. The first is the incidental button, and the second is the survey button. And we'll look at where those lead in a minute. Then finally, to navigate through the various screens in the app, you have a navigation bar at the bottom. So to the far left is the home button. That's where we are now. Next is the field guide, then access to your existing surveys, and then finally the news and frequently asked questions section. So once you've clicked on that cog, it takes you to the account settings screen. We have the account username. So when you are wanting to check whether you're logged in, when you need to know what your username is, if you're wanting to talk to somebody and ask for assistance if your app isn't functioning properly, one of the things we'll ask you about is what your username is. And this is where you can find it if you've forgotten from when you signed up. There's a button to sign out of the app in case you want to sign in with a different account. This is an important one. This is the sync data button. So every time we make a change to the field guide or change the functionality of the app without creating a new version, if you if you hit the sync data button, it will update the app to the latest version of the app. The only exception to that is if there is a new version of the app out on the Apple or Android store, then you'll need to upgrade the app via that. The last two buttons are if you're having technical issues. These are some things you can try to help fix it. Clear all surveys does what you'd expect. It deletes all of the surveys off your phone. I recommend trying to upload any surveys that are there before using this button, if you can, because you will lose all of that data otherwise. Once you've uploaded them to the server, this button won't do anything other than remove them from the phone. And then finally, reset app. That actually just takes you all the way back to a clean install of the app, as if you've just downloaded it off the iPhone or Android store. And so that will remove any data that you've collected. It'll remove any photos you've taken within the app, etc. So this is a last resort if you're really struggling to fix an issue. If the app's just really not functioning, then this is sort of the last thing you can try. Then finally, down the bottom, this is your current version of the app. And at the time that we've made this video, version 2.1.1 is the latest version. And as I said, if your app doesn't show that number, you can go to the Apple or to the Android store and download the latest version to your phone or tablet device. Then finally, and this is a button we'll use throughout the app, this arrow in the top left corner will take you back to the previous screen, which in this case is the home screen. So the next section of the app is what happens when you hit the incidental button on that home screen. That takes you to this form, which allows you to record an incidental sighting. So this is for when you are just going about your day, doing your thing, and you see a butterfly and you just want to note it down. Maybe it's a particularly good butterfly, or you're just trying to keep a count of all of the species that you have in your garden, or whatever the case might be. This is for when you don't have the time or the inclination to do a proper survey. You just want to note down what it is that you've seen in that moment. So the buttons here, there's a big blue button at the top that says Add Sighting. Click anywhere on that, and that will take you to the species list to choose the butterfly that you've seen, or butterflies. And yes, in the latest version of this app, we have actually now made it possible to add multiple species per incidental sighting. So let's say maybe what you saw was a Richmond birdwing if you're in southern Queensland, and you really want to record that because it's a threatened species. But then you also happen to see a black Jezebel and maybe a yellow albatross at the same time. And so you want to record all of the species that you saw, even though it's an incidental sighting. You will often see more than one butterfly at a time. So rather than having to go through that form multiple times, you can now add all three of those species all at once. You can manually edit all of the fields here, including temperature, number of observers, the date, the time, latitude, longitude, altitude, and accuracy. So as you can see, most of those are set automatically when you open the incidental form, but you can click on each of those fields and a keyboard will pop up and you can actually manually edit those. If you wanted to change the latitude or longitude, if you don't want to add sightings via the website that you've maybe recorded a number of years ago, you can still do it through the app by doing this, by modifying the date and time and location. And then finally, there's a comments field at the bottom that lets you take notes for the sighting. You can also use these yellow buttons to automatically update the date and time or the location data. And this is for where you may be walking around with the app, you've opened it up, you've started an incidental form, but then you see a butterfly 100 meters away, so you walk over there and now you are a bit later and a bit further from where you first opened it. You want to just update it to where you were, to where you are now, from where you were to where you are now. And then finally, and again, this is a button that's repeated through a number of different parts of the app. This floppy disk icon in the bottom right is how you save the sighting. If you hit the back button, then without hitting the save sighting, you will lose the data, and you do get a warning before that happens. But just remember, you need to hit the save button to actually log the sighting on your phone. And we'll get into this later, but to actually upload the sighting to the server so that we have access to it is another process. So we'll look at that later on in the talk as to how that works. So the next screen that we're going to look at is the survey screen. So we talked about incidental records. This is the other choice on that home screen that lets you create a proper survey. And when I say proper survey, there's a number of types. So there's a few different options here compared to the incidental screen. This first field is name. This is editable, and so it can be useful to give it a meaningful name. It does give you an automated string of characters, which will be unique for that sighting. But if you want to, for example, do repeat surveys at a particular site, you can use the same name. And then when you search for those sightings on the website, you can pull all of them up using the same search term, which is quite helpful. And you can use iterations of that too. So you could, for example, say my garden 1, my garden 2, if you want to do point surveys in places that are nearby but not within a reasonable distance to survey at the same time. So survey type, I mentioned there are a number of different survey types. So the types are an area count, which is generally we recommend about 1 hectare, but you can obviously set that to however large you want it to be. Point count, which is generally just the immediate area around where you're standing. And that's sort of for areas where, you might be quite restricted in how far you can move, like a forest clearing or a tree fall gap in a rainforest. Your garden, the very top of a hill or a mountain. These are the sorts of places that a point count might be more appropriate than an area search. And then finally, a transect, which is just a line walked through a habitat. And ideally, for each of these 3 kinds, the main thing to remember is that you need to record the size of the area or the length of the transect, and you need to take account of how long you spent surveying that area or that line. That's how we calculate the effort that was put in for each survey, and that's how we compare what you've done this time to what you do next time, or what you've done this time to what somebody else does at the same place. And it's important that those surveys are conducted within one habitat type. So if you're setting up an area that goes from rainforest to eucalypt forest, then that means you're surveying two different habitat types. So ideally, you would set it up so that you do one survey in rainforest and then walk over to the eucalypt forest and do a second survey in the eucalypt forest. And that goes for line transects as well. Ideally, you want those transects to be in one type of habitat. So distance is a one-size-fits-all button, one field. So for an area or point count, distance is the diameter of the area. So let's say you want to survey a hectare, which is 100 meters by 100 meters. You would put distance as 100 meters. It's actually slightly off from that because we generally assume you're doing a circle rather than a square. So if you want to know more about that, then you can always look at the video that we'll upload, which will be about how to create a survey methodology, and that will have some more information about how these things work. And then finally, as I mentioned, the duration, or how long you surveyed for. And ideally, if you're going to do repeat surveys at the same site, you would use the same duration each time, and that makes it comparable. And then finally, the blue button for create surveys is down the bottom, and that's because for incidental records, the idea is that we want the record to be created quickly and finished quickly. It's just meant to be a very quick process from start to finish. Whereas with a survey, it's more deliberate. You spend some time thinking about what you're going to do. You set up the parameters of the survey, and then finally you start surveying by hitting the blue button and adding species as you walk around. And then this notes field here is for the survey as a whole, and then for each species that you add, if you add a picture, you'll be able to add a caption which has more information with that picture. The next screen is what happens when you hit the blue button, and this goes for incidental or survey sightings. The blue button takes you to this, which is the species list. There's a number of different ways to navigate this list. So the first one is this search bar up the top, and you can use common or scientific name for this. And for example, if you typed in the word blue, you would end up with something that looked like this. So all of the species in family order that have blue in the title. And the same would work if you typed in a scientific name. If you used a genus name that had multiple species, then all species in that genus would come up instead. Back to this main species list screen, this arrow against each family name will actually collapse or expand that family. So if you collapse all of them, it's going to look something like this. And I left the one down the very bottom up because one of the most common questions we get is, how do I add an unknown species? If I got a good photo of a butterfly, have no idea what it is, rather than guessing what you think it might be, it would be much better if you use this unknown species button at the very bottom of the species list. And then our experts will get a notification if you do that. As long as you've added a photo, they should hopefully be able to help you work out what it is. Although not all butterfly species can actually be identified from a photo. There are a handful of female butterflies which would have to be handled or dissected to work out what they are. We're not encouraging you to do that. Just saying that sometimes the answer will be we're just not sure. And then the other one in that unresolved bucket is day flying moths. At this stage, the app only handles butterflies. So in those 6 families that you can see above the unresolved section there. But we do want to allow people to record if they've seen a particularly interesting moth. They can do it through this day flying moth button. And that serves 2 purposes. One, we certainly don't discourage you from sending us cool pictures of moths under this heading. I'm sure the experts that we have on board would love to see some of those sorts of things. But the other main use of it is when you send us a picture of the unknown species category, if it turns out to be a moth, and it's more common than you think, someone sees a really cool looking thing, they think it's a really unusual butterfly, it turns out to be one of the more flamboyant day flying moths, we can, instead of just discarding that sighting, we can actually put it in that day flying moth category so that the data isn't lost, and eventually we'll hopefully find a home for those moth sightings where someone can use them. The next way to navigate the species list is up here in this top right corner. This white arrow opens up a panel that lets you restrict what species are seen or not seen. So you can see there that there's cited or not cited. So that means if you've hit a button that says I saw a 4-barred swordtail, and then you hit cited, the only species you would see is 4-barred swordtail. But if you've added 5 or 6 species, you would just see those 5 or 6 species. And not cited would show you all the species you haven't yet recorded. And then nearby and far is based on the ranges of the species, using the GPS on your phone, am I currently standing in the habitat of a species or not? So if you hit nearby, it shows you all the species that should be in the area where you're currently standing based on what we know about their ranges currently. And far shows you all of the species that are not known to occur where you currently are standing. And then if you want to actually record a species, you do it via this individual species pane. So you add to the species count using this white button on the left, and a short press adds 1. So you can just go click, 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 and that'll iterate it up by 1 each time. Or if you hold the button down for, I think it's about a second or second and a half, it should decrease the number. If you accidentally misclick and add 1 to a species you didn't mean to, or add a few too many counts to the one species, you can decrease it that way. You can add a photo using this camera button, and we'll get into how that works at a later stage in this talk. And then you can also access the juvenile counts section. So the main purpose of the app is to let people survey for adult butterflies. That's the things with wings that we see flying around that most people think of as a butterfly. But we know that there'll be some enthusiasts out there who do recognize the host plants and the eggs and the larvae and the pupae of various butterflies. And in fact, we also know there are a number of groups out there who survey specifically for the juvenile stages of rare and threatened butterflies. And we wanted the app to maybe be able to cater for their needs too. So if you hit that black arrow, and you can only get that black arrow up once you've added at least 1 to the count for the species as a whole, then it brings up this bar at the bottom of that species. And if you click anywhere on that bar where it says egg, larvae, pupae, etc., it brings up a different screen, and you can manually edit or use the plus and minus buttons to increase those numbers. This is also a useful trick if you've seen a large number of adults. For example, a few years ago, I saw a tree which was covered in flowers and had about 10,000 2-spot line blues on it, and I was able to use the manual edit of this screen to add 10,000 into the count rather than having to hit the button 10,000 times, which made it a lot easier. So back to the main species list screen again. There's a couple more things that are worth knowing about this. There's a visual representation under each species as to whether you're currently standing in the habitat of within the range of that species. It doesn't know the habitat, just the range. So for example, when I opened this screen that's screen captured here, I was standing in the range of four-barred swordtail and also Maclay's swallowtail, blue triangle, pale triangle. But five-barred swordtail, green triangle, and green spotted triangle were not in range here. So it's a nice, easy way of, before you add a species, just check that that's demonstrating that you are actually within the known range of the species. And it's fine to record a species that is out of the known range. We fully expect that people will be recording range extensions for species. But it just helps serve as a check and balance for people who maybe aren't 100% sure of what they've seen. And so that target that has no dots in it is the species is not known from this area icon. And finally, yes, you can use this arrow in the top left corner to go back to the screen you were on before. So once you've added all your species and you want to save the survey, then you go back and you hit that save button that we talked about earlier. Now, once you've hit the camera button, it takes you to this page here. And this is where you play around with the images for each species that you've added to a survey. So you have to do this for each species. You can't just add all of your photos to the one thing, because it'll associate, say you add 5 species worth of images here, it'll associate it all to the one species and all the other species will be blank. So you have to hit the camera button for each individual species you've photographed. This button down in the bottom right corner lets you add a photo, and that pops up a menu choice, which is take a photo with your phone or choose from your photo gallery. Taking a photo with the phone can be a really quick way of going about things if you need to be quick. But I find personally that using the inbuilt phone camera app in my phone is probably slightly more convenient, and then going back and adding the photos at a later stage through this interface is good. So if you choose that option, you can bring up the photos on your phone in an album or in the camera roll, and then you pick one of those photos, and you can then crop and edit it. Wholeheartedly recommend you crop your photo down to fill the frame of the screen, because our experts get quite a lot of records from around the country that they have to verify, and they don't want to have to be downloading your photos, zooming in on it, and trying to work out what it is. So if they can't see the butterfly properly in the photo that they get, they may actually just say, can't verify this, and move on. So if you want to increase the chances of getting a successful sighting out of what you've contributed, definitely recommend cropping in so that you get a reasonably visible example of the butterfly on the screen. You need to select what type of sighting it is. So whether it's an adult, egg, a larvae, etc. This is because these photos make it into the database for the project, and we don't want to have to manually be adding that information at a later stage. So it's important that you do choose this, and it is in fact you can't add a photo without choosing that information. What isn't mandatory though is a caption, but this is where you can potentially add useful information, particularly for an unknown species. If you're contributing a photo of a butterfly and you're not sure what it is, any information you can add here will be useful for the moderator, for the expert to work out what it is that you saw. And it could be what habitat you were standing in, what plant it was associating with. If you saw it being looked after by ants in the case of juvenile stages, that can be really useful to know. Maybe the temperature, what the weather was like, those sorts of things can be quite useful. And particularly if it had any behavioral quirks, like the way it was flying or how often it was landing, that sort of thing. And finally, this save icon, again, once you've hit that save button, you'll come back to a screen that looks like this. If it's worked, you'll note that you should have a picture here in this screen now. If it hasn't worked, it'll be blank and you'll have to try again. That once you've saved a picture or pictures into the screen, you hit the back arrow in the top left corner, takes you back to the species list, and then you hit the back arrow again, takes you back to the survey or incidental page, and then you hit save to save the overall survey. So we're going to cover the surveys section here. We're not going to talk about the field guide section specifically because all the controls are the same. And I'll probably talk a bit in a different video about the field guide specifically, but feel free to have a play around with it yourself because the controls for the field guide are essentially the same as the species list controls when you are creating a sighting, incidental or survey sighting. On the survey screen, this is the list of surveys that you've completed with this device. Now that assumes you haven't used the control panel to clear surveys or reset the app. And there's a few useful bits and pieces here. First of all, you'll see on the far left is the name of the sighting. So if you haven't manually changed it, it'll be a unique string of numbers like you can see here. But if you've manually changed it, that name will appear there. And for each survey line, there will be an icon which shows you how many species were recorded by that survey, whether the survey has currently been uploaded to the server or if it still needs to be uploaded. And this is the screen where you upload your sightings to our server. And to do that, you just hit the Upload All button. This was implemented this way so that people could use the app offline. So that means as long as your GPS chip is functioning, you don't need to be in mobile reception to record data. You can record the data, and then when you get back to Wi-Fi or when you get back to mobile reception, you can upload the surveys then. You can also edit your surveys here. So if you click anywhere on that survey to open it, it'll open a screen that looks very similar to the Create Incidental or Create Survey screen, but you'll note in the top it says Edit Incidental. And you can go through and change any of the particulars, the date, the time, the latitude, longitude, and the species that you've recorded. And the important thing is once you've made any changes again, you need to hit the Save button. And once you've hit that Save button, you'll have to re-upload that survey to the server again. The final control is the News button in the bottom right-hand corner. This takes you to this news screen, which gives you access to a number of off-app functions. So by hitting the News button, it takes you to our website, to the News section. FAQ takes you to the frequently asked questions documents that we've put up. Visit website takes you to our website, which is butterflies.org.au. And this also gives you access to your account and all of the data that not only you've contributed, but everybody else in the project has contributed that's been verified by our experts is available via the website. And we'll produce another video shortly that will actually look at how to use the website, how to access survey information en masse so that you can see what it is that we're trying to achieve with all the data that people are contributing. This contact support button takes you to our email address, which is australianbutterflies@gmail.com. And then finally, this is all of the thank yous to everyone who contributed to the project, obviously acknowledging that we received funding from the Australian government. Also we received support from a number of photographers who are very generous with their photos. I've mentioned two in particular, but we also received images from many other photographers who were quite generous with their photos. So that's the end of this section of the talk on how to use our app. As I said, we'll produce at least 2 more videos, one that shows how to use the field guide and one that shows how to use the website, as well as we intend to produce some videos on specifically how to use the app to record sightings, to look at how the workflow would work for a number of different options. Thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.